Shabbat Shalom to everyone again. I'm thankful that I'm given the opportunity to speak with you this evening, and it's an honor that our congregation gives to me, and I value it a great deal. On Sunday, God willing, Jane and I will be traveling to Israel. We've not been there since the pandemic. We were planning on being there for Passover in 2020, but then the corona plague arose, and that was it. My daughter Leora is expecting her third child, and we're trying to arrive at just the right time to be there at least for the bris. But here it gets complicated. We are flying on Sunday, July 17th, which is Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, a day of mourning in the Jewish calendar. It is a fast day. It is a day without music, without Torah study, and there is the tradition of reading on the floor with a candle the book of Lamentations called Eicha. Some Jews do not even bathe or wear leather, all to show a sign of mourning for a great historical event. A very strange place, an airplane flying to Israel to commemorate this very sad day. Why carry on this fast in the middle of the summer? According to Jewish history, horrible things happened on this date. The first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. The Bar Kokhba revolt was crushed by the Roman Emperor Hadrian in 135 CE. The Temple Mount was plowed under, and Jerusalem was rebuilt as a pagan city on this date. Now, in Reform Judaism, Tisha B'Av has made an interesting comeback. Early Reform rabbinic sages, many of them, or most of them who were Talmudic sages of great learning, didn't consider the destruction of the temple to be a disaster, because it ended the temple cult and signaled an evolution of the Jewish people to a higher purpose. Rabbi Larry Hoffman, the leading expert on Jewish liturgy in the Reform movement, teaches that these Reform scholars were progressives. They believe that Jews had a mission to spread God's word everywhere on the earth, so that they saw the destruction of the temple as God's handiwork. The Reform movement's view of this holy day began to change following the Holocaust and the birth of the State of Israel in the 1970s. A service for Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, and Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, could even find its place in that stage of the development of Reform liturgy, the gates of prayer. And Reform camp directors used Tisha B'Av, which fell at an opportune time in the summer, as a way to experience for teenagers the Holocaust and the whole idea of Jewish martyrdom. Now, as you know, I am a rather traditional Reform Jew. I was trained originally as a conservative rabbi and spent 24 years in conservative congregations. But I have a kind of cognitive dissonance with Tisha B'Av. It's hard for me to grasp it. I know that it's important to remember days of destruction in Jewish history. And I think tradition should be held on to even when it's difficult to fully embrace it. And certainly Tisha B'Av reminds us of Jewish vulnerability. But here is the struggle within me. I think that the early Reform rabbis were making an important point. Our Judaism today comes out of the great houses of study in Babylonia, not the offering of sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem. It sounds horrible, but we have modern Judaism because the temple was destroyed. And it gave way to a Judaism based on Torah and mitzvot and synagogues and prayer. That is what we as Jews all over the world observe and preserve. And to take it even further, I do not pray, as do our Orthodox Jewish brethren, that the temple be rebuilt. And some religious fanatics today take it to its crazy extreme. They would create a war between Arabs and Jews by destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, and then they would go about building the third temple. It sounds completely maddening, but there are serious people in the Jewish world who think this way. And let's be clear, for me, and I'm only speaking for myself, what happens in the old city of Jerusalem at the Western Wall, or what some people call the Wailing Wall, is ridiculous. It's not holy. It is a retaining wall of the Temple Mount. It's not one of the standing walls of the ancient temple. When people put little pieces of paper with prayers in it and shove it into the wall, I feel exasperation. Do they really believe that God hears their prayers through a retaining wall? Friends, I really had a moment of confusion when I was a student in Israel the summer before I went to rabbinical school in 1978. I went to the Western Wall on the evening of Tisha B'Av, and it was, the only way to describe it was a happening. There were Yemenite Jews chanting their unique penitential prayers, sitting on the ground before the Western Wall, and there was a sense of awe and intensity that I had never experienced. And then the next day, I walked through the new city of Jerusalem and said to myself, this doesn't make sense. We're mourning a destroyed Jerusalem, and I'm walking in a Jerusalem of restaurants, hotels, shops, nice apartments, and falafel stands. To me, the rebirth of Israel, this Zionist realization, was much more compelling than sitting on the ground, reading the book of Lamentations, written by Jeremiah, who was mourning the destruction of the first temple. But as with all things Jewish, and this is my consistent experience as someone who loves Judaism, studies it every day, the more you study in Judaism, the more you understand and the more you will do. Classical Jewish texts distinguish between Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala, the kind of spiritual heavenly Jerusalem, and Yerushalayim Shel Mata, the earthly Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem of this earth, God is visible, suffering is absent, and there is perfection. I misstated that. In the heavenly Jerusalem, God is visible, suffering is absent, and there is perfection. In the Jerusalem of this earth, the earthly Jerusalem, real people struggle with deep political, religious, and personal conflict. In Yerushalayim Shel Mata, perfection remains elusive. So on Tisha B'Av of 2021, of 5781, we mourn the destruction thousands of years ago of the ancient city and the temple and all that surrounded it. But at the same time, we dream of a Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala, a heavenly Jerusalem. That ideal that is never reached but is always longed for. A heavenly Jerusalem, a sacred dream. For me, Tisha B'Av has become to mean something rather important. It reminds me that there is, thank goodness, a physical Jerusalem that we can stand in, and a heavenly Jerusalem that we can dream of. If Jerusalem is the center of the Jewish people, this heavenly Jerusalem is part of the ideal world that unites all Jews. It is our goal. We want a Jerusalem that is beautifully diverse and is the honored home of multiple religions. We want an Israel that is committed to the highest prophetic ideals. We want a Jewish people who really believes that they are a light to the nations and want to transform the world. And we want a world where people see commonality, not just self-interest. I encourage all of you to participate in the communal commemoration of Tisha B'Av in our community that will take place on Saturday evening and Sunday morning. It is an important dimension of the Jewish experience. And Jane and I will be traveling to Israel on Tisha B'Av in that Delta Airline synagogue. And Jane and I will read the Book of Lamentations as is tradition from our seat. But when I get off the plane, my thoughts will not only be with the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago, but my profound thanksgiving for the reborn Israel and my new grandchild, who I pray will live in a vibrant, meaningful, forward-looking Jewish life in the great miracle of our time, the Jewish people reborn and reconstructed in their historic homeland. Shabbat Shalom.